At Church Answers, we love a good turnaround story, especially when a struggling church gets healthy and begins to thrive. We've got one of those stories. You have told us that you want more of these kinds of interviews. So we've got one of the best here. Gary Moritz is on the show, joining us from City United Church in Lunenburg, Massachusetts. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Hey, Sam and Tom. Thanks so much. It's an honor to be with you, and I'm really humbled to be part of this podcast.
Good. We're going to humble you even further. We've known Gary for a while, so the jokes may fly just a bit. But if you don't know this story, which you probably don't, you need to hear it. Gary has just done an incredible job at his church, and we're going to talk a lot more about that here in a moment. But before we do, we certainly want to thank our sponsor, Tyndale. Incredible resources from Tyndale are available at Tyndale.com, but you should go get the Filament Bible. We absolutely love this Bible. It's a true experience. The way that it works is if you have a New Living Translation and it is filament enabled, you just point your phone or your tablet at the particular page number. It reads it like a QR code, and up pops a variety of resources. You can be reading just about any chapter in the Bible, and there will be articles and interactive maps and videos and music and devotionals around that particular topic. So it makes reading the Bible quite an experience. I love this app. It's one of my favorite things to show my church members when they're talking about reading the Bible, wanting to go deeper, and just wanting more out of a Bible reading experience. So you've got to go get the Filament Bible Collection. They've got a variety of Bibles to pick from over at Tyndale.com. We'll provide a link in the show notes as well. You've got to go check it out. So that's the Filament Bible Collection from Tyndale. We're grateful that they are sponsoring the show.
You know,
All
Sam,
right, Gary.
I'm realizing how geographically diverse we are. We've got you in Florida. We got Gary in Massachusetts. We got me in Tennessee. We got our producer, Alana, in Idaho. We've got our sponsor, California Baptist, obviously in California. And then we got our other sponsor, Tyndale, in the Chicago area.
I mean, we're pretty much, in just about every region of the United States. We need somebody in Iowa to step up. That'll get us right in the middle.
All right. We'll probably get those cards and letters.
We love Iowa. We have listeners in Iowa, and they're awesome.
Yes, they are. Hey, Gary, tell us the story of City United. First of all, let us know. I know a good bit of your story. Listeners don't. What got you there? What was the problems? You realize we don't have 4 hours, so you can't tell us all of the problems. But what got you there, and what did you see once you got there?
Yeah, great question. First, just real simple. It was a call of God breaking my heart for New England, and I really didn't know where I was supposed to go, but God brought me to a place, and that place was, had a different name at the time. And when I got there, there was about 75 dedicated people. The median age was about 58, and the church was, what I found out later, it was actually in bankruptcy and owing a good amount of money, and the church had a lot of pressure, and the money was not there. And so it was just an interesting story how God called my wife and I and my little kids up to a place that we did not know. So it was very Abrahamic in nature.
No, I got to stop you right there. You got called to a church, you went, and then you found out they were in bankruptcy.
I caught that, Sam. I got that.
Yeah. I think one is I didn't understand what bankruptcy was and the different types of bankruptcy. It's not something you learn in seminary. But really, God was doing a work there, obviously, way before I got there. And the church had found itself in a situation where, it was struggling. And God, I guess, called me for the job. And so I said, yes, Lord. And we just moved and trusted God through all of that.
Well, tell us a little bit about Lunenburg. I will admit, I had never heard of this town until you and I became friends. And I'm like, one, it's kind of a quirky name. But just, I know you love your community, and you, if I remember right, you grew up in New York, right? And then moved to Boston, Boston area. I guess it's on the outskirts of Boston a little bit, but tell us about Lunenburg.
Yeah, so I grew up in New York, and then I was down in Washington D.C. On staff at a pretty large church there, and when I was in the Marine Corps, and then God called me from there all the way up to New England, and it's drastically different. You know, in D.C., people have a lot of titles after their name. It's really about power and prestige and influence. And coming into Lunenburg, it was a very small town, different thinking wavelength. And so it was interesting for me to learn the town. And so obviously it's predominantly Caucasian. We do have about 24%. I found this out years later, of Hispanics. So we're doing a great job reaching them. And so it took some time for me to kind of learn the area, but it definitely, it's pretty packed. So it seems like a small town, but the three towns collectively, they have about 300,000 people in just a short radius of about 5 miles. So it's compact with a lot of people and a lot of influence.
Tell us about
All
the
right.
struggle.
Struggling?
Yeah, tell us about the church's struggles. What? Okay, we
Yeah.
know bankruptcy was part of
Yeah.
it. I love Ernest Hemingway in his book *The Sun Also Rises*. One of the characters says, "How did you go bankrupt?" He said, "2 ways: gradually and then suddenly." So something
Oh,
probably happened. Tell us. I know you've already said the church is bankrupt, but tell us a little bit more. You said you've given us the median age, you've given us the number of people who were there, but how about attitude? How about desire for turnaround themselves? How about any potential opposition?
yeah. There was lots of prayer, obviously, and tears, and a lot of unknown going into this. And so there were financial pressures, and those pressures prevented us from the church moving outward. So there was a high amount of debt, a lot of established programming. They had a Christian school, they had a daycare, a radio station, and the buildings themselves. And just kind of coming into that, I've learned over time that I thought it was pretty cool, just in a way, and I'll get to the culture in just a second. But it was just really cool how the founding pastor had a vision to reach his community when he was younger, and I thought it was cool when I pulled the town records and I realized that there was nothing on the property since the founding of America except our church. And it was
Wow.
woods until God called a man to go plant. And so that was kind of encouraging to me to say, okay, God's not done. And God put the church here to influence our community. And so really when I came here, there was just a lot of building relationships, understanding trust, being humble, having a listening posture. Learning the context was key for me, because I had to listen to the place, and the place was different. And so the culture was different, because values create behaviors and behaviors create a culture. And so I had to really try to understand the people, what they celebrated, what was important to them, and then really, bring around and say, okay, what does Jesus value? Like, I know everybody here values something and it's important, and I get that, but what does Jesus value? And so slowly I began to introduce kind of the three things that Jesus taught us: was the great commandment in Matthew 22, the great commission in Matthew 28, and the great collaboration in John 17, that we would be one. And so, there's definitely opposition in those areas.
All right, so I remember you telling me about the worship space, and
Yeah.
that was part of the problem. You get there, the church is struggling with some bankruptcy issues. We'll just say that, financial
Yep.
issues.
Yep.
Your worship space it's not usable, if I remember right. What was your first priority?
Yeah. I think more importantly, one of the things that I had to understand: the community inside and the community outside. And so I just kind of put these four shifts, I guess, in my head, and said, okay, we've got to move from inward to outward. We have to move from safety to have more of an urgency, that people are dying and people need Jesus, and then moving from that comfort to being conformed into the image of Christ, and then looking at the community and saying, okay, how do we shift from the complexity that we have, and let's move out into the community, and let's watch God work. I thought that was really powerful inside. But then outside, we really started to form kind of faith-based partnerships in the community. And at first it wasn't a positive thing because it's almost less than 2% where we are as evangelical Christians. So there's always pushback, and there's always a different agenda than what God's agenda is. And so we had to really position ourselves in a positive light because we love our community. We want to see people around our neighborhoods reach for Christ. So we started partnering with the schools and the shelters and the towns and started showing up in the things that people were already doing. So that was some things that we kind of did. The worship space that you talked about, it was kind of awkward. At the time, it's a pretty big space. It could seat 1,000 people. With they had pews in there, and it was a pretty large room. But when you don't have 1,000 people, your critical mass is kind of awkward. So we had to really work through some of that. And when people walked in, it just had a different feel of like kind of not welcoming. So we had to just make some drastic shifts. God made shifts, we made shifts, and we just made it work.
Gary, I was in a conversation about a year ago with our design build partner, Brown Church Development Group. And I was trying to recollect some of the things that you had told me about the building and insurance matters and the sanctuary, the worship center, and all those things. His question to me was funny. He said, "Is he still there?" I said, "Yes."
No.
So this is Brown Church Development Group, the premier design build firm in the United States for churches. And he heard all these things. He said, "Is Gary still there?"
Oh, no,
That's
it was.
Well,
hilarious.
and Gary, your story is one that, I mean, yours is extreme. I
Yes.
will just admit that. But
Yes.
at the core are a lot of the same issues that other churches struggle with. Lots of churches have facility issues.
That's
Lots
right.
of churches struggle with a lack of an outward focus. And that's part of why I love your story, because it's extreme, but at the same time, it's relatable. And Dad, Brown Church Development Group, one of the things they're doing are renovations. I mean, that's a huge part of what they do, is helping established churches renovate space, because many churches are struggling with deferred maintenance right now.
Hey, I don't want to get too far off on Brown because we're talking to Gary, but I just want to say this one thing for those who are listening. Brown is now doing virtual. It used to be called long range planning, but it's growth strategies to where you're going to put your buildings, how you're going to connect them, and they do it virtual now. And so it's so neat talking to them because it becomes affordable for anybody. Okay, Sam, you get us back on track with Gary, and let's talk about his story.
Yeah, and I'll ask a question here in a moment, but I also want our listeners to know that Gary's got a book, and we want people to go get this book. It's called Carry On: Tactical Strategies for Church Revitalization and Renewal. It is an excellent book. I know that because I've read it and I wrote the foreword. Don't hold that against Gary that my name is attached to the foreword, but we'll provide a link in the show notes. If you're in a church revitalization scenario, and you're kind of nodding your head along as you listen to Gary, Carry On: Tactical Strategies for Church Revitalization and Renewal is the name of the book. Click on that link in the show notes and go get this book. It's really good. All right, Gary, tell us about the name City United. I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, that's a really good name for a church. I will admit, it does sound a little bit like a soccer club, but it's a really, really good name, City United. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that was just really birthed out of my heart to reach our city. And it really came out of like John 17, that we would be one, that we would be united, and Ephesians 4, that the church would be united. And I just had in my mind, like, as we're helping plant churches in all across New England, I said, what would it look like for a local church to be established? And also that the concept of the city would be united around Christ, like capturing your town for Christ. So if I could just put that vision in every pastor and every leader I talked to, that was birthed out of my heart. And that was the thing. How do we bring our city together to get them to hear the gospel? And once I made that outward pitch, things started to take off. The church before had city in it. And so what I did was I said, hey, why don't we just become a City United? And planting churches around, and the vision is still planting. We have another church planter going out. We're planting in a church a couple of towns over, and so it's just this concept of just multiplication, and so that's really where it came from.
Man, that's good stuff. When the revitalization process started and you guys started to experience a turnaround, what was the community saying and what was the community's perception?
Yeah, that's a great question. There was the community inside of our church, where there was a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. We grew really fast. And they just kept inviting friends and brought them to the place. And that started to get, picking up, like, what's the buzz in the town? Why is everybody going there? That kind of started. And so that kind of helped us. But then on the outside of the community, we just said, okay, we want to be not popular. We want to have influence. And how can we have influence? And so in our community, we love our community. We're very involved in our community, and we wanted to get our ear to the ground to hear the different pockets that were pulsing in our community. So we do outreaches now, and people show up. And I mean, outreach is kind of a churchy word, but we do like a trunk or treat. We'll have like a couple, 1,000 something, that 1,500 people or something in a town just kind of show up that are unchurched in our community. If we do, any type of program or anything, that we make sure that it's outward focused, that we want to bless the community. And so now the community knows us as help. We've gotten awards from the schools now. We've gotten awards from homeless shelters. Just thank you for giving. Thank you for leading with an open hand. And that's what we want to be known as, because we believe when we serve and we meet a need, that opens up an opportunity for us to be able to share Christ with somebody.
Let's talk about the future, Gary. Let's say the next 5 years. And by the way, I know one of the things you're doing is one of many. You've really become a regional presence for Church Answers University. You took on a lot of students right away for the size of Church Answers University, and we thank you for partnering with us and the ability for your church members and those who are involved in it to get a certification in 9 months or so. And we're supplying all the books and the education, but you're bringing them to us. So I know that's part of your future. So thank you for your partnership with Church Answers University. You got that? What else you got?
No, I think that's great. Actually, on Sunday, I walked by a pretty large group, and there was a buzz going. I said, hey, what's up? They're like, hey, Pastor, I want you to know this is the Church Answers group. And I said, okay, cool. So they're just talking about what they're learning, and it's really, really cool. So you guys are like part of our family. So it's pretty awesome to see that. Yeah, I think there's a couple of pockets that I'm really focusing in on in the next 5 years. Obviously, it's next generation, very focused on Gen Z. I believe you change the future by changing the youth, and you reach the youth, you change the future. And so we want them to have a place to discover, develop, and deploy for gospel impact, starting all the way in 6th grade. So they start with a pipeline, and they start coming through the ranks, and then they start leading. By the time they're, really by the time they're 13 years old, they're actually leading movements in the church. And so
Wow.
We're very focused on next gen, because they are the church now. They're not going to be the church. They are the church right now on mission. The second thing is that we want to bring value to our community with our property. So the buildings and our property and the acreage and all of that, we want to open it up for the community to use to help them go further faster. And so we're developing that right now. And it's really, really exciting behind the scenes of what's going to come, because we want to make sure that we're not measuring just the weekend. We've kind of made a drastic shift, right before COVID, but COVID just accelerated things for us. But we measure what happens during the week over the weekend. And so we want to see how many people are being discipled every single day, what's happening on the ground every week, who are the connection points. And so that's a real value to us. The third area is ethnic ministries, reaching the nations and bringing them value by providing space for them, resources for them, so that they can reach their people in their context, in their language. And so, I'm praying that Church Answers will start having that translated in different languages. I know that's a lot, but I'm like, man, if I could just get this out to different ethnic ministries, this thing can just really take off. And then another area is just training center, building, like as you said, really building our place for a training center to disciple leaders, to train people in their next steps in their walk with Christ, and just using our building spaces beyond the weekend. And so we're definitely committed to that. And then the last thing is we're sticking to is continue to financially partner with what we call venture partners and getting behind new movements of multiplication to help people go further faster to reach people for the kingdom. So it's not just about putting money into our building and to what we're doing, but we're getting behind movements of people where we're seeing different things happening.
That is fantastic to hear all the things that are happening. And Gary, we want to thank you for being a part of this podcast. We want to thank you for what you're doing at your church. I know a lot of pastors think that it's a difficult situation that they're in. You've demonstrated that God can work in New England, and I guess the corollary to that is God can work anywhere. And New England's one spot that just proves it. So thank you for being with us. Hey, I want to thank California Baptist as well. We've talked about educational institutions. I love this program that they have, where if you are a sophomore, junior, or senior in high school, you can get college credit from California Baptist. Now, a number of schools do that, but the difference here is, number one, the first course is free. And number two, the next courses, subsequent courses, are discounted deeply. And then number three, you're not a high school student in a virtual room. It's all digital, but in a virtual room with other high school students only, you are in the college experience. It's a great new venture that California Baptist, as you've heard Gary talk about, to reach the next generation. They are looking at the next generation of high school students coming in, and they're doing a great job. You can look in the show notes for this new and innovative ministry program from California Baptist University. Gary, thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, with thanks to Gary, with thanks to Sam, with thanks to Alana, our geographically diverse group is now ready to go to the next episode. So thank you for joining us on this episode. We will continue to see you as we talk about all things church in Rainer on Leadership. Hey, folks, this is a PS to our podcast. We got some exciting stuff that we want to offer you absolutely for free. Sam, when you think about predictive factors in a church's growth, if you take out demographics, what are some things that come to mind? Just two. I mean, don't give me a list of 10. Just two or three things that come to mind on predictive growth of a church.
Well, evangelism, and whether the church is doing it or not.
Bingo.
And then I will add, is it an ongoing evangelism emphasis?
Double bingo. And maybe something about leadership and their commitment to that. So all of the above.
Evangelistic churches have evangelistic pastors. Is the staff, is the lead pastor doing the work themselves?
We have a free download for you, and it's actually a sheet that you can self-score. You answer 20 questions, anywhere from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we come back and we predict what your growth rate is going to be for the next year in worship attendance. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good tool. There's a link to that for the attendance predictor. Look in the show notes. You'll absolutely love it. That's cool. We'll see you soon.